Good evening, and welcome back to our quiet corner of Edwardian England. The fire is warm, and a place is kept for you here tonight. Come with us now into the Yorkshire Dales. In the soft, golden days at the end of summer, in the year 1906, down the green lanes we go, slow and easy, behind one patient horse. In a little painted caravan, rose and green, travels Isabel Harkness, a gentle woman of 49. She is following the winding road her late sister once loved, a painter who wandered these hills every summer with her brushes and her colours. Isabel has never painted a single stroke, and yet, each morning, she wakes to find a small watercolour pinned inside her door. A painting of that very place, in his sister's own hand, still faintly wet. Who leaves them, she cannot say. But there is nothing to fear here, only soft hooves on the lane, and a beck singing over the stones. So rest your head and dim your light. Tell us where you are listening from tonight. And if you would like to travel a while with us, do stay and subscribe. Now, let us begin. The morning Isabel Harkness set out, she very nearly did not go at all. She had been standing in the little paddock behind the cottage since 6:15, in the grey before the sun, with the harness over her arm, looking at the mare. And the mare, whose name was Damson, had been looking back at her with the patient, faintly amused expression of a creature who has watched a great many human beings make up their minds, and knows there is no hurrying it. "I don't know how to do this," Isabel had said to her, aloud, in the empty paddock. "You understand that, I hope. I have never once done this in my life." Damson had blown softly through her nose and swished her tail and gone on cropping the wet grass. And that, in the end, had been what decided it. There is something very steadying about a horse who is not worried. If Damson was not worried, Isabel thought, then perhaps the thing could be done after all. And she had put the collar over the broad, dark neck, the way she had watched her sister do it 100 times, and she had buckled and strapped and checked, slowly, twice over, and she had backed the mare between the shafts of the little painted caravan, and she had climbed up onto the driving seat and taken the reins in her 2 hands, and sat there. For a long moment she did not move at all. Below her, the reins ran down to the mare's back, warm and living. Behind her, through the small door, was the whole little world of the caravan, packed and ready. Ahead of her was the lane, going down between its walls into the soft grey morning, toward the Dales, toward the road her sister had travelled every summer for 30 years, and had painted into 100 pictures that hung now in 100 parlours across the north of England. Isabel Harkness was 49 years old. She had never married. She had kept house, in one way or another, for the whole of her life, for her father until he died, for an aunt in Leeds until she died, and then, for the last 12 years, for her elder sister Marguerite, who had needed keeping in the way that clever, wandering, impractical people always need keeping, and had never once thought to be grateful for it, which had been perfectly all right, because Isabel had never once done it to be thanked. Marguerite had died in April, quietly, in the end, after a hard winter, in the narrow bed in the cottage, with Isabel holding her hand. And Marguerite had left her 3 things: a little money, which was in the bank and would keep her carefully for the rest of her days. A cob mare called Damson, who was standing now in the shafts with her ears turned back, listening, and the caravan. Isabel looked down the grey lane, and she thought of all the sensible reasons not to go. She was a woman, alone. She had never driven a horse above a walk to the end of a field. She did not, if it came to it, entirely know how one made a fire in the little stove without filling the whole wagon with smoke, though she had watched it done, and she had a fair idea. People would talk. People had already talked. A respectable spinster of 49, going off alone into the hills in a painted caravan like a gypsy at her age, with no one to look to her. Let them talk, thought Isabel. She clicked her tongue, the way she had heard her sister do it, and she shook the reins very gently and said, "Walk on then, Damson, walk on." And Damson leaned into the collar, and the caravan creaked and rocked and moved. They went down the lane, and Isabel Harkness went with them, out of the life she had always lived, and into the last golden weeks of the summer of 1906. It was slower than she had imagined, and that was the first great gift of it. She had thought, in some corner of her mind, that a journey was a thing you did in order to arrive somewhere. That was what a journey had always been. You went to the station, and you got on the train, and the country was pulled past the window like a ribbon, fast and blurred. And then you were there, wherever there was, and the journey was over and forgotten. This was nothing like that. Damson walked. That was all she did, and all she was asked to do, and she did it at a steady, unhurried 4-mile-an-hour pace that could not be argued with, and, Isabel soon found, did not want arguing with. At that pace, the country did not blur. It came toward you slowly, and arrived, and stayed a while, and let you look at it, and then went slowly behind you, and let the next thing come. A hedge was not a green smear. It was a whole world, and you had time to see the whole of it. The honeysuckle gone over, and the first blackberries, and the small brown birds working in the deep of it. A hill did not jump at you and fall away. It rose gradually over an hour, so that you saw it change its shape and its colour and its mood as you came round beneath it, and by the time you had passed it, you knew it, the way you know a face. By the middle of that first morning, without quite noticing when it had happened, Isabel had stopped hurrying inside herself. It was a curious sensation, and she examined it in her dry, practical way as the lane went by. She had spent her whole life a little ahead of the present moment, she realized, always half a step into the next task, the next meal, the next thing that must be got ready. And here, on the driving seat of a caravan behind a walking horse, there was no next thing. There was only the lane and the mare and the morning. The next thing would come when it came, at 4 miles an hour, and not one moment before, and there was nothing whatever she could do to hasten it. And so, for the first time in longer than she could remember, she simply stopped trying. She let the reins lie loose. Damson, it turned out, hardly needed them. The mare knew a road when she was on one, and kept to her own side of it, and slowed for the hills without being asked. And Isabel understood, with a small pang, that Damson had done this road before, many times, over many summers, with another woman on the seat. She wondered whether the mare knew that the woman had changed. She wondered whether it mattered to a horse. And she reached forward once and laid her hand flat on the warm, broad rump, and Damson flicked one ear back at her, and they went on together up the lane, the two of them, into country that neither of them had come to alone before. The Dales opened around her through that long first day like a book being turned. She had known them a little from her sister's pictures, but her sister's pictures, she began to see, had been true the way a single note is true of a whole song. The real thing was so much larger. The limestone came up out of the green as the day went on, grey and silver, in long walls and sudden pale scars on the fell sides. And the fields ran up and up between their dry stone walls to the open moor above, and the whole country was stitched together with those walls, mile on mile of them, grey seams running over the hills as far as she could see, made by hands that were all dead now and had left this behind them. There was water everywhere. That was the other thing she had not understood from the pictures. The whole country was talking to itself with water. Becks running down every fold of the hills, some no wider than a stride, some tumbling white over ledges of pale rock, all of them going the same way, downhill, seaward, singing. She could hear them long before she saw them, and long after she had passed. And every so often the lane would take her over one, on a little hump-backed bridge of grey stone so old and so worn and so exactly right, that it seemed not to have been built at all, but to have grown there. And she would stop Damson on the crown of it, and sit and listen to the water going under, and then click her tongue and go on. She passed a hay meadow where 3 men and a boy were building a stack, and they stopped and leaned on their forks and watched her go by. Not unkindly, only with the frank, open curiosity of country people at anything new on the road. And one of them lifted a hand to her, and she lifted hers back and felt absurdly pleased about it for the next half-mile. She passed a farm, low and grey and long, with a dog that ran out to the wall and barked at Damson, who ignored it with enormous dignity. She passed, once, a thing that startled her badly. A motor car coming the other way on a wider stretch, snorting and rattling and throwing up a cloud of white dust, with 2 men in goggles and long coats sitting up in it, looking pleased with themselves. Damson did not like it. She threw up her head and sidestepped, and for a bad moment Isabel's heart was in her mouth and her hands were hard on the reins. But the thing went by and was gone, and the dust settled, and Damson snorted her opinion of the whole business and walked on. And Isabel found she was shaking a little and laughing a little, and that she agreed with the mayor entirely. The country did not want that thing in it, she thought. It was too fast. It went by too quickly to see anything, and left nothing but noise and dust. And the 2 men in it had not once looked at the hills. That was the difference, she decided. That was the whole difference between the 2 ways of travelling. You could go through a country fast and take nothing from it and leave nothing in it. Or you could go with it, slow, and let it in. She thought her sister would have said something like that. She thought her sister had probably said something exactly like that once, and that Isabel had not been listening, because she had been packing the pictures or making the tea. The map was in the colour box, and she stopped at noon to look at it, She had drawn Damson off the lane into the mouth of a green track, a broad old drover's way running up between walls onto the open fell, where there was grass for the mare and shade from a stand of ash. And she had climbed down, stiff from the seat, and unhitched Damson enough to let her graze, and then she had gone into the caravan for the first time on the road, and stood a moment in the little doorway, looking at it. It was her sister's whole life, in a room the size of a box bed. The stove at one end, small and black and cold now. The bed cupboard across the far end, behind its lace-edged curtain. The fold-down table. The little cupboards and lockers, every inch of the space used and used again, fitted and jointed by some long-dead wagon builder who had understood exactly how much a life could be pared down to and still be a life. And everywhere, on every panel, the painting, roses in bunches and swags, red and pink and cream, and birds, small bright birds, and scrolls of gold that had gone soft and dim with age and lamp smoke, but still caught the light. It was gaudy, and it was beautiful, and it smelled, faintly and forever, of wood smoke and linseed oil and her sister. The colour box was under the driving seat, where it always lived. Isabel drew it out and set it on the table and opened it. She had opened it 100 times, to pack it and clean it and put it away. She had never once opened it to use it, and she did not open it to use it now. She simply looked, for a moment, at the 2 rows of little coloured pans, worn into hollows by 30 years of her sister's brush. The colours with the strange, beautiful names her sister used to say aloud like a charm. Rose madder and gamboge, and Prussian blue and burnt sienna, and the one called Payne's grey, that Marguerite had loved above all the others, and used for every rainy sky in the north of England. The brushes lay in their groove, cleaned and pointed, and there, worn into the wood of the box's edge where a thumb would rest, was the faint blue stain, ground into the grain, 30 years old, that no scrubbing had ever shifted. Isabel looked down at her own right hand, at the side of her forefinger, where she had rested it against the box 100 times, carrying it, packing it. There was the same faint blue ghosted onto her skin, her sister's colour, not her own. She had never earned it. It had simply rubbed off onto her over the years from carrying the thing. She turned that thought over for a while and did not quite know what to do with it and set it aside. Under the lid of the box, folded, was the map. It was drawn in her sister's hand, in ink gone brown, on a piece of good paper folded so many times it had gone soft as cloth at the creases and would not lie flat. It showed no roads that any roadmaker would have recognized. It showed the green lanes, the drovers' ways, the old tracks, looping and doubling through country that Isabel could only half make out. And along the loop, here and there, her sister had marked small crosses, and beside a few of them a word or two, in that same small brown hand, soft now and hard to read. The pitches, the places her sister had stopped, summer after summer. Her favourite corners of the world. Isabel found with her finger where she thought she was, and she found the next cross along the loop, and she saw that it was perhaps 6 miles on, over a low pass and down into the next dale by a beck, and that if she went on after her noon halt, she might reach it by the evening. She would go there then. She would follow the loop, cross by cross, the whole way round, and see the places her sister saw. That was all she had come to do. She wanted to be quite clear with herself about that, and she was. She had not come to paint. She could not paint. She had no more notion of how to make a picture than of how to fly, and no wish to make a fool of herself trying. She had come only to look, to stand where her sister had stood, and see what her sister had seen, and understand, perhaps, a little late, a little of the life she had spent 12 years serving without ever once sharing. That was all. She folded the map and put it back and closed the box. She reached the beck pitch as the light was going, long and gold. She had known it was the right place the moment she came down to it, before ever she checked the map, and that frightened her a little and pleased her more. It was simply, unmistakably, a place her sister would have loved. The lane came down off the pass, and the dale opened below, and there was the beck running clear over pale stones, and a dry stone wall coming down to a ford, and one rowan tree leaning over the water with its berries just turning, and behind it all the fell rising green and grey into a sky that had begun, in the west, to go the colour of the inside of a shell. Isabel drew Damson off onto the level bank above the ford and stopped, and then there was a great deal to do, and she was glad of it because it kept her from thinking about how alone she was in a wide, darkening country with the night coming on. She unharnessed the mare, slowly, remembering each strap, and rubbed her down with a wisp of grass, and tethered her on a long rope where the grass was good, and gave her a feed from the nose bag. And Damson set to with the deep contentment of a horse who has done a fair day's work and knows it. Isabel fetched water from the beck in the 2 cans, the water so cold it made her wrists ache. She gathered wood, dead ash, and rowan from along the wall and broke it small. And then, kneeling at the little stove in the caravan, with the light nearly gone, she made her first fire. It caught. It very nearly did not, and then it did, a small flame running up through the kindling, and she fed it, carefully, holding her breath, and the smoke went up the little chimney, the way it was meant to, and not out into the room, and within a quarter of an hour the stove was ticking and creaking with heat, and the kettle was beginning its long climb toward the boil, and the whole little painted room had begun to glow. She lit the brass lamp, and she pulled the door to against the cool of the evening, and sat down on the low bench by the stove, in the small golden world of the lamp and the fire, with the kettle singing and the beck singing outside and the mare cropping grass in the dark. And she made herself a pot of tea and drank it and ate bread and cheese and an apple, and was, she realized with a slow surprise, as nearly happy as she had been in a great many months. She had done it. That was the thing. She, Isabel Harkness, who had never driven a horse or made a fire, or spent a night alone under the open sky in her whole careful life, had harnessed the mare and driven the road and made the camp and lit the fire. And here she was, warm and fed and safe, in her sister's little painted room, at the first cross on her sister's map, with the whole of the Dales dark and enormous and peaceful around her. She sat with her tea and let the fire tick and thought of Marguerite, not with grief exactly. The grief had gone quiet over the months, into something gentler. She thought of her sister sitting just here, on just this bench, on 100 nights like this one, at the end of 100 days on the road. And she felt for the first time, not that she had lost her, but that she had come at last and too late to where her sister had been all along and was beginning dimly to understand it. The fire sank, the lamp burned low, and Isabel Harkness, tired to the bone in a way that was all in the body and none of it in the heart, made up the narrow bed behind its lace curtain and undressed and lay down and listened to the beck for a while in the dark, and to the small movements of the mare, and to the enormous quiet of the fells, and she slept more deeply and more sweetly than she had slept in years. She woke at first light to birdsong and the sound of water, and lay a moment not knowing where she was, and then remembering with a small lift of the heart that surprised her. The light was coming grey, and then pearl, and then faintly gold through the lace at the little window. The stove had gone out in the night, and the room was cold, and her breath showed. She could hear damson cropping close by, unbothered. All was well. She sat up and drew back the curtain and swung her feet down onto the cold floor and reached for her shawl. And then she saw it, pinned to the inside of the caravan door at the height of her eyes, where she could not possibly miss it, was a small square of paper. Isabel went quite still. For a moment she did not move at all. Then, slowly, she got up with the shawl about her shoulders and crossed the little room 2 steps and stood in front of the door and looked. It was a painting, a small watercolour, no bigger than her 2 hands, pinned by one corner with a brass pin to the painted panel of the door. And it was a painting of the ford, of this ford, the one just outside, the one she had camped beside, the beck running clear over its pale stones, and the wall coming down, and the one rowan leaning over the water with its berries turning. It was her sister's hand. She knew it at once, and beyond any doubt. The loose shore washes, the particular grey of the water that was Payne's grey and nothing else. The way the light was caught and held. It was her sister's hand entirely, and it was still damp. She touched it very lightly with the tip of one finger at the edge where the sky was. The paper was cool and faintly moist, the way a watercolour is for an hour or 2 after it is finished, before it dries and sets. It had been painted in the night. It had been painted here, of the view outside this door, and pinned to this door, while she slept 6 feet away behind a lace curtain. And she had heard nothing, and damson had not stirred, and the colour box was under the seat where she had put it. She was sure of it. She would check in a moment. She was sure of it. Isabel stood in the cold little room, in the pearl-grey light of the morning, with her sister's brush warm painting under her fingertip, and she was aware that her heart was beating rather fast, and she waited quite deliberately in her dry, practical way to feel afraid, and she found that she did not. She examined the fact, standing there, the way she examined everything. She had woken alone in a caravan in the empty hills to find that someone had come in the night and left a painting on her door, and she was not afraid. There was no cold hand on her neck. There was no wish to run. What she felt, looking at the small, damp picture of the ford, was something entirely different, something she had no proper word for. The nearest she could come to it was the feeling of coming down in the morning to a house you thought was empty, and finding, to your astonishment and your comfort, that the fire has already been lit and the kettle set on, by hands you did not hear and cannot see. She looked from the painting to the little window, and beyond it to the real ford, grey and clear in the real morning. And she saw, with a small quiet shock, that the painting was not quite of what she had seen the evening before. She had seen the beck and the wall and the rowan, but the painting showed something more, something she had been too tired and too taken up with the fire and the mare to notice, the way the first light, coming over the shoulder of the fell, struck the wet stones of the ford and turned them for an hour at dawn to gold. She had not seen that. She had not thought to look for it. And here it was, painted, waiting for her on the door, as if to say gently, "Look, you missed this. Look again." Isabel Harkness unpinned the small painting, very carefully, and held it in both hands, and turned, and opened the door, and stepped down onto the cold, wet grass in her shawl and her bare feet. And she looked at the ford, and the light was coming over the fell exactly as it was painted, and the wet stones were turning to gold, exactly as they were painted, just for that hour, just at dawn. And Isabel stood in the wet grass with her sister's damp picture in her hands, and looked at the real thing it had shown her, and did not think, for once, of the next task, or the fire, or the mare, or anything at all in the wide world except the gold light on the wet stones of the beck. She stood there a long time. Then she went in and lit the fire, and put the kettle on, and pinned the little painting up above the stove where she could see it. And she made her tea, and sat with it, and looked at the painting, and looked out of the door at the morning, and wondered without any fear at all, and with a slow spreading warmth she had not felt in years, what the second cross on the map might bring. The second cross on the map brought her, by the middle of the next afternoon, down to a ford where a man was mending a kettle. Isabel had come to know, in a day and a half, that the map did not measure distance the way a railway measured it. 6 miles on her sister's soft brown paper might be 2 hours or might be 5, depending on the pass between, and she had learned not to ask when she would arrive, but only to go, and to let the arriving happen when it happened. So she was not impatient when the lane came down at last to a wide stony ford across a broader beck, and she saw, drawn up on the near bank in the shade of an alder, a second caravan. It was nothing like her own. It was small and plain and workmanlike, a tradesman's van, its sides hung about with tin, kettles and pans and cans and colanders, ladles and skimmers and long-handled things she had no name for, all catching the afternoon light and turning gently on their strings. A small brown pony grazed nearby, and on an upturned box beside a little charcoal fire sat a man of perhaps 60 in shirt sleeves and a leather apron, with a kettle upside down between his knees, tapping at its bottom with a small hammer, unhurried, absorbed, entirely at home. He looked up as Damson's hooves sounded on the stones, and Isabel saw a broad, weathered, good-humoured face, brown as a nut, with a grey moustache and a pair of shrewd, kindly, deep-set eyes. And she saw those eyes take in the caravan behind her, the rose and the green and the gold, and change. "Well now," said the man, and set down his hammer. "There's a wagon, I know, though the face on the box is a new one." He rose slowly and touched his forehead. "Ellery Banfield, ma'am. Tinker, brazier, mender of most things that'll take mending. And that," he nodded at her caravan with something careful and gentle in it, "is Marguerite Harkness's van, or I've gone blind in my old age." "It was," said Isabel. "It is. I'm her sister, Isabel." "Was," said Ellery Banfield quietly. He was still a moment. I'd heard. Last back end, at Hawes, someone said. I'm sorry for it, ma'am. She was a rare one, your sister. 20 year and more I've met her on this road, here and there, spring and summer. Her going one way and me another. You could set your clock by her, near enough, if she'd only kept a clock, which she never would. He smiled, and the smile was full of an old, easy affection. Painting, painting, always painting. And now here's her van, and here's you in it. Well, he looked at her a moment longer, shrewdly, not unkindly. You'll not have done much of this before. Is it so plain? It's plain as your good boots, ma'am, that never walked a green lane till this week. But he said it warmly and turned to his fire. You'll take a can of tea. Sit you down. The beck's a good one and Damson knows it. Look, she's drinking already. There's no hurry on the road. That's the first thing and the last thing, and near enough the only thing. There's no hurry on the road. And Isabel, who a week ago would sooner have gone hungry than sat down at a stranger's fire by a ford, climbed down and sat on the offered box, and took the can of strong, sweet tea in her 2 hands, and was glad of it. They talked a while, easily, in the way of people who have all the afternoon and know where they must be. Ellery Banfield knew the road the way Isabel was only beginning to guess it might be known. Not as a line between places, but as a country in itself, with its own weather and its own people, its fairs and its farms and its good pitches and its bad, its fords that ran high after rain and its wells that never failed. He had been going up and down it, he said, man and boy, for better than 40 years, and his father before him, and he supposed his knees would give out on it in the end, and that would suit him well enough. Your sister understood it, he said, tapping thoughtfully at the kettle again. The road, I mean. Most folk pass through. They're going somewhere, and the road's just the nuisance in between. But your sister, she wasn't going anywhere. She was just going. That's a different thing entirely, and there's not many understand it. He glanced up at her. You're learning it, I'd say. You've the look of someone learning it. I'm learning a great many things, said Isabel, rather late. Late's better than never, said Ellery Banfield. And on this road, there's no such thing as late, for there's nowhere you're due. He set the mended kettle aside and picked up a pan. Where are you making for, if it's a fair question? Isabel hesitated, and then, because his face invited it, drew the map from her pocket and unfolded it, and showed him the loop of crosses. He wiped his hands on his apron before he took it, she noticed, and held it as carefully as if it were made of glass. I, he said softly, looking at it. I know these. Every one. I could walk you to the half of them blindfold. His brown finger hovered, not quite touching, over cross after cross. This one's the ford we're sat at. This one's the high pitch above the force, where the water comes down, that she loved above any place on earth. Though it's a hard pull-up and a lonelier spot than most would care for. And this one at the end here. He paused, over the last cross of all, high on the map where the loop closed. This one I don't rightly know. She never took me there. Kept it to herself, that one. He folded the map along its soft creases and handed it back with both hands. You follow that, Ma'am, and you'll see the Dales as few living souls have seen them. She chose her pitches like she chose her colours. Careful, for love. Isabel took the map back and put it away, and did not tell him about the paintings. She had thought about it, sitting there. She had thought about saying, and every morning, at every pitch, I wake to find a fresh painting of the place pinned to my door, in my sister's own hand, still wet. But she found she could not, partly because it sounded, said aloud, like the raving of a woman gone soft in the head from too much solitude, and partly, and more truly, because it was hers. It had happened to her in the small hours, in the little painted room, and it was the first thing in a very long life that had happened to her alone and belonged to no one else, and she was not ready to hand it over, even to so kind a man as this. So she held her peace and drank her tea and let him talk. Before she went on, he did a thing that touched her. He went to his van and rummaged and came back with a small paper twist of tea and a screw of sugar and pressed them on her and would not be refused. You'll not have thought to lay in enough, he said. Nobody does, the first time out, and you'll meet me again, likely, up the dale. I'm bound the same way, slow. We'll keep company on the road, off and on, if it suits you. He helped her back up to the seat and stood back and touched his forehead again. Walk on then, missus, he said to Damson, and the mare walked on, as though she had only been waiting to be told by someone who knew the word. Isabel looked back once. Ellery Banfield had already sat down again to his kettles in the shade of the alder, with his tin turning and winking on its strings, a small, unhurried figure by the water, exactly where he belonged. She lifted her hand, he lifted his, and the lane took her up and round, and he was gone. She made her pitch that evening high on the shoulder of the dale, where the map's cross sat, in a green hollow out of the wind, with a view down the whole valley to the blue hills beyond. And the night went as the first night had gone. The mare tended, the fire lit, the tea made, the lamp glowing, the enormous quiet coming down. She was quicker at it all now. Her hands had begun to learn the work, the straps and the fire and the water, and there was a deep, plain satisfaction in that, in growing daily more able, at 49, when she had thought herself long past learning anything new. She sat a long while on the step that evening, after the work was done, with her tea going cold in her hand, and watched the light drain slowly out of the dale, from gold to rose to grey to a blue that was nearly dark. And she thought that she had never in her life simply sat and watched a day end, from beginning to end of its ending, without once thinking of the washing up or the morning. Marguerite must have watched 1,000 days end so. It seemed a great extravagance, and a great peace, and she understood, sitting there, that it had cost her sister everything comfortable and settled to buy it, and that she had thought it cheap at the price. And in the morning, there was a painting on the door. She had half known there would be. She had gone to sleep, wondering, without fear, and woken and looked at once, before she looked at anything else, and there it was, pinned by one brass pin, cool and faintly damp, in her sister's unmistakable hand. A painting of the green hollow and the long view down the dale, but not the view she had seen and admired the evening before. The grand sweep of it, the blue distance. No, the painting showed, close and low and tender, a single foxglove growing out of the turf beside the very wheel of the caravan, tall and rosy and freckled within, with a fat bee halfway into one of its bells, and beyond it, small and soft and out of focus, the great blue distance she had thought was the whole point of the place. Isabel stood and looked at it a long time. Then she went out in her shawl and knelt down by the wheel in the wet grass. And there was the foxglove. Exactly. And as she knelt and watched, a bee came and climbed into one of the low bells, and the whole tall stem swayed and steadied under its weight. She had camped beside it and never seen it. She had looked at the blue distance and never once looked down at what was growing against her own wheel. Look, the painting said, as the first had said. You are looking too far off. Look at what is here. She was learning to read them, she realized. That was what was happening. Each morning, her sister set her a small lesson in seeing, and each morning, Isabel was a little quicker to understand it. The paintings were not showing her the places. They were showing her how to look at the places. And that, she began to understand, was the thing her sister had had that Isabel had never had. The gift she had spent her life beside and never caught. Not the trick of the brush, which was only the hand's part, but the deeper thing behind it, the seeing, the noticing, the turning of the head at the right moment toward the right small ordinary miracle that everyone else walked past. She carried the foxglove painting in and pinned it beside the Ford painting above the stove, and looked at the two of them together, and something in her chest ached and warmed at once. She met more of the road's people as the days went on, and the dale led her northward. There was a farm, low and grey at the dale head, where she pulled in to ask for eggs and milk, and was met by Grace Halliwell, the farmer's wife, a warm, bustling, apple-cheeked woman of 40-odd, who would not hear of selling her anything but loaded her instead with eggs and a can of milk and half a fresh loaf and a slab of butter, and stood at the gate talking for the better part of an hour, hungry for a new face and news of the Low Country. Grace had known Marguerite too, of course. Everyone on the road had known Marguerite. She painted our Beck, Grace said, proud and shy at once. The one behind the barn that he never thought was anything to look at. She made it lovely. We've it framed in the parlour still. Fancy her sister at our gate. And she sent Isabel on with a child's drawing of a cow done by her small daughter, pressed on her for no reason at all except the general overflowing kindness of the woman. And Isabel pinned it up inside the caravan with the paintings, and it belonged there. There was a boy too, a day further on, a lean brown shepherd's lad of 15 or 16 named Tom Agle, who appeared beside a gate one evening as she was making her pitch, and stood watching her struggle with the tether, and then, without a word, came and did it for her, quick and sure, and mended the frayed rope end while he was at it. He minded damson for her while she fetched water. He yarn in the blunt way of a boy who has not yet learned that some questions are not asked. The very questions Isabel was too shy to ask anyone. Was she not afraid, alone? Did she not miss her sister? What would she do at the end of the road when the crosses ran out? I don't know, Isabel said to the last of these, honestly, and the boy nodded, satisfied, as though that were a perfectly good answer, which perhaps it was. He told her, before he loped off into the dusk to his flock, that there was weather coming. Rain, he said, with the certainty of a boy raised under that sky. 2 days, maybe 3. You'll want to sit it out somewhere with good ground under the wheels, or you'll be bogged to the axle. He looked at her map when she showed him, and put a brown finger on the high cross above the force, the one Ellery had spoken of. There, he said, hard standing up there, rock under the turf, and a good overhang for the pony. That's where I'd sit it out. And he was gone. That night's painting, when it came, was of Tom Agle's hands on the tether rope. Only that. 2 brown young hands, deft and sure, drawing a knot tight in the last of the evening light. Isabel had watched him do it and thought nothing of it, only been grateful. But her sister's eye, wherever it looked from now, had seen the small grave beauty of a boy's competent hands doing a kindness in the dusk, and had set it down and left it for Isabel to find. She was beginning to see, she thought, standing in the cold, bright morning with the little painting in her hand. Not everything, not the way her sister had seen, but something. The world was coming slowly into a sharper and a tenderer focus, day by day, cross by cross, as though all her life she had been looking at it through a slightly misted glass, and someone gently, without a word, was wiping the glass clear. And the rain was coming. She could smell it now herself, on the freshening wind, a wet green softness rolling up the dale. She looked at the map and at the high cross above the force, and folded it away. She would go up to the high pitch, the one her sister had loved above all places on earth, and she would sit out the weather there. She harnessed damson slower and surer than a week ago, and clicked her tongue, and turned the caravan's rose and green shoulder to the climbing lane. And the mare leaned into the collar, and they went up into the greying morning toward the force and the rain, and whatever the high pitch had kept waiting for her all these years. The pull-up to the high pitch was the hardest thing Isabel had asked of herself or of damson since they set out. The lane left the green dale bottom and turned to a stony track, and the track turned upward, steep and rough, climbing the shoulder of the fell in long, tired zigzags, with the beck falling away below and the sky coming closer above. Twice Isabel got down and walked at the mare's head, for the caravan was heavy and the way was cruel, and she led damson up yard by yard, speaking to her low and steady, the way she had learned the mare liked. And damson, who was old and wise, and had done this climb before with another woman at her head, leaned into the collar and took it slow and did not fail her. The rain held off just long enough. They came up over the last steep pitch and out onto a wide shelf of level ground high on the fell, tucked under a shoulder of grey rock, with the whole world falling away below, just as the first fat drops began to come down out of a sky gone the colour of pewter. And there was the force. She heard it before she was fully up. A deep, soft, continuous roar, not loud but enormous, filling the air the way the smell of the sea fills the air before you see it. And then she came round the shoulder of rock, and there it was, a fall of white water, tall as a church, coming down over a black cliff in a long, unbroken ribbon into a dark pool far below, endlessly falling, endlessly the same, throwing up a fine mist that hung about it and caught what little light there was, and turned it to a soft grey glow. It was the most beautiful and the loneliest thing Isabel had ever seen, and she understood at once, standing there in the beginning of the rain, why her sister had loved it above every other place on earth, and why she had never brought Ellery Banfield, nor anyone, to see it. Some things you keep, not because they are secret, but because they are too much yourself to share. She got the caravan onto the hard standing under the rock overhang, exactly where Tom Agle had said it would be, with good stone under the wheels and shelter for the mare. And then the rain came down in earnest, and there was a wild half-hour of getting Damson under the overhang and rubbed down and fed, and the wood stowed dry, and herself soaked through and laughing at it. And then she was inside, with the door shut and the stove lit and the lamp glowing, and the rain drumming on the wooden roof a hand's breadth above her head, and the great roar of the force going on and on outside in the wet grey dark. And she was as safe and as warm and as snug as a mouse in a wall, and the weather could do its worst. It did its worst for 3 days. They were, Isabel thought afterwards, among the happiest days of her life, and she could never quite explain why. She was alone on a high fell in a caravan the size of a box bed, in weather that did not lift from one grey hour to the next, with the rain always drumming and the force always roaring, and the mist so thick against the little window that there was no world beyond it at all. By every measure she had lived by for 49 years, it ought to have been miserable. And it was not. It was the deepest peace she had ever known. She kept small hours. She woke when it grew light and slept when it grew dark. And in between she tended the stove and cooked her small meals and mended a tear in her skirt and sat for long stretches simply listening to the rain and the water with her hands quiet in her lap, doing nothing, wanting nothing, being nowhere but exactly where she was. She had never done nothing in her life. There had always been a next task, and she found up there in the rain that doing nothing was not empty at all, but full, brimming, if you did it slowly enough and paid it enough attention. Marguerite had known that too. Marguerite had spent 30 summers learning to do nothing beautifully, and everyone had thought her feckless, and Isabel, who had kept her house and paid her bills, had half thought so too. She was ashamed of it now, gently, without any sting, the way you are ashamed of a thing you did as a child before you knew better. On the first evening, before she found the paintings, she did a small thing that she thought of often afterwards. The rain had eased for an hour, not stopped but softened, and she had gone out in her shawl with her head bare to see to damson under the overhang. The mare was dry and content and glad of her, and Isabel had stood a while with her hand on the warm, damp neck, the two of them looking out together through the fine drifting rain at the great white fall of the Force. And it had come to her, standing there. She was not lonely. She had expected to be. She had braced herself, setting out against a great weight of loneliness that she had thought must fall on any woman alone in the hills. But it had never come. There was the mare, warm under her hand. There was the road and its people, met and parted and to be met again. There was the little painted room, full of her sister. And there was the country itself, which she had begun, without quite noticing, to feel companioned by, as though the fells and the walls and the falling water were old quiet friends who asked nothing of her, but that she be there and pay attention. She had spent her whole life among people, and been, in some deep place, alone. And here, alone on a high fell in the rain, she was not. It was a puzzle she did not try to solve. She only stood in it, with her hand on the mare, and was grateful. On the second afternoon, going through the lockers for a dry match, she found the paintings. She had not been looking for them. She had been looking for matches, and had opened the long, low locker beneath the bed, the one she had not yet needed. And there, wrapped in an oiled cloth against the damp, was a flat wooden portfolio, worn at the corners, tied with a faded green ribbon. She knew what it was before she opened it. She sat down on the edge of the bed, with it on her knees, and untied the ribbon and folded back the cover. And there they were, her sister's paintings. Not the ones she sold, the neat saleable views the print sellers wanted, but the private ones, the ones she had kept. 30 summers of this road, this country, these very pictures, painted over and over across the years. The ford where she had met Ellery, the green hollow with the foxglove, and the force again and again, in every weather and every light, in spring spate and summer trickle, at dawn and at dusk, and once, wonderfully, under snow. Isabel turned them over slowly, one by one, in the lamplight, with the rain on the roof, and it was like turning the pages of a life. Here was a place she had passed 3 days ago. Here was one she had not yet come to. Here was the same rowan tree, 10 years younger, slighter, its berries fewer. Here was a farm gate she thought she knew, and a hen in the dust before it, caught in 3 strokes so that you could all but hear it fussing. Here was a winter painting, the walls all black and the fields all white, that must have cost her sister a day of frozen fingers to make. Her sister had walked this road for 30 years, and set it all down, faithfully, lovingly, not for money and not for fame, but simply because she had looked at it and loved it and wanted to keep it. And here it all was, 30 years of looking, wrapped in an oiled cloth in a locker under a bed, where only the next traveller in the little painted room would ever find it. And at the bottom of the portfolio, beneath all the finished paintings, there was one that was not finished. It was a painting of the Force, begun and left. The cliff was there, and the pool, and the first washes of the falling water, laid in with that sure, loose hand. But it stopped. Halfway down the fall, the colour simply stopped, and below it was bare paper. the pencil lines still showing where the rest of the water was meant to go. A brush had been laid across it once and taken up the paper's tooth in a dry streak and then gone no further. It was the last thing her sister had painted here. She had begun it on some last grey afternoon on this high shelf, and something had called her away, or the light had gone, or she had meant to come back to it next summer. And next summer had not come for her, and the painting had stayed here, halfway finished, wrapped in its cloth, waiting. Isabel sat with the unfinished painting on her knees for a long time, while the rain came down. She did not weep. She had thought she might, and she waited for it, honestly, the way she waited for fear. But it did not come. What came instead was something quieter and steadier, and in the end, far kinder. A slow, spreading, settled understanding of how much her sister had loved this, all of it, the road and the water and the looking, of how full her wandering, feckless, unmarried life had truly been, fuller by far than Isabel's own careful, settled one, and of how little Isabel had understood it all those years, packing the pictures and making the tea, standing just outside the thing her sister was doing and never once stepping in. She was inside it now. That was the strange thing. Up here in the rain, with the portfolio on her knees, she was standing at last exactly where her sister had stood, inside the life, inside the looking. And she understood it now, too late to tell her. And yet somehow, up here, with the paintings all around her, not too late at all, she wrapped the finished paintings carefully back in their cloth and retied the green ribbon and put them away. But the unfinished one she kept out. She propped it on the little table against the window, where she could see it, the force half-painted, the bare paper waiting below, and she looked at it a great deal over the last day of the rain, and did not quite know why she could not put it away with the others. She thought, that last wet evening, about why she could not put the unfinished painting away, and she came, slowly, to an answer that satisfied her. It was because it was the one thing her sister had left undone. Everything else Marguerite had touched was complete, finished, sold or kept or given away, rounded off and let go. But this one thing she had begun and not been able to finish, and it had waited here in the dark for her. And now Isabel had found it, and it seemed to her, turning it in the lamplight, that a thing left unfinished is not a sad thing, not always. Sometimes it is an open door. Sometimes it is a hand held out. Sometimes it is a way of saying, to whoever comes after, that there is still something here to be done, and that they might, if they chose, be the one to do it. She did not follow the thought any further that night, but she kept the painting out, propped against the window, where she could see it in the morning. The rain stopped in the night. She woke to a silence so sudden and so complete that it was the silence that woke her, the absence of the 3-day drumming on the roof. And under the silence, the force going on softer now, the spate of the rain already draining out of it, and through the little window, where for 3 days there had been nothing but grey mist, there was a pale, clean-washed light, the light of a world rinsed and wrung out and hung up new. And on the door, in the pale new light, there was a painting. Isabel lay still a moment, looking at it across the little room, and then rose and went to it. It was pinned by its one brass pin, cool and faintly damp, in her sister's hand. But it was not of the force. It was not of the cliff or the water or the wide washed fell. It was of the inside of the caravan. It was of this very room, the stove, the lamp, the lace at the window, and the low bench beside the stove, where Isabel sat each evening. And on the bench, painted with the same tender attention her sister gave to a foxglove or a fall of light, was Isabel's own shawl thrown down where she always left it, and her own teacup, and the shape in the cushion where she always sat, her place, empty and waiting for her, and painted with love. Isabel stood in the clean morning light and looked at the little painting of her own empty place by the fire, and at last, gently, the thing she had waited for came. Not grief, not quite, but its warmer, kinder cousin, a great wave of tenderness that filled her eyes and spilled over and ran down quietly, while she stood there and did not hurt at all. Her sister had painted her a chair, across whatever distance it was that the paintings came from. Her sister had looked at the little room and seen Isabel's empty place in it and painted it tenderly, the way she painted everything she loved, as if to say, "You belong here now. This is yours. Come in and sit down and stay." She did not go on that day. The weather had cleared and the road was open, and by every sensible reckoning, she should have harnessed Damson and gone down to the next cross while the going was good. But she could not leave the high pitch yet. She stayed another night, up under the grey rock with the force, in the place her sister had loved above all places on earth, and she pinned the painting of her own empty chair on the wall beside the others, above the stove, with the Ford and the foxglove and the boy's brown hands and the child's drawing of a cow, and she sat in her place by the fire, in the shape her sister had painted, and drank her tea, and was, she found, entirely at home in the world for the first time in her life. Only one cross remained on the map now, the last one, the one at the top where the loop closed, the one Ellery Banfield had said he did not know, that her sister had never shown to anyone, that she had kept to herself. Isabel took out the map that last evening on the high pitch and looked at it a long while by the lamp. The last cross sat high and alone, further up even than the force, at the very head of the country, with no word beside it, no note, nothing but the small brown mark her sister's hand had made. She wondered what was there. She wondered what place her sister had loved so much, or kept so private, that she had marked it and never spoken of it, not even to old Ellery, who had known her 20 years. And she found, wondering, that she was not impatient to know, and not afraid to know, but only quietly, warmly ready. Ready in a way she had not been ready for anything in her whole careful life. Ready the way you are ready, at the very end of a long day's journey, to come at last to the place where you will sleep. She would go up in the morning. She folded the map and put it away, and banked the stove, and lay down in the narrow bed behind its lace curtain, with the force roaring soft and steady outside and her sister's paintings all around her in the dark. And she listened to the water for a while, going on and on, endlessly falling, endlessly the same. And she slept. She went up in the morning, into a world made new by the rain. The last cross lay higher even than the force, and the track to it was fainter than any she had followed yet. A green thread of old drove road climbing on and on into the very head of the country. But Damson knew it. That was the thing Isabel noticed and held on to, and did not quite let herself think too hard about. The mare, who had needed her hand on every strap and her voice on every hard pull these 2 weeks past, needed nothing now. She leaned into the collar at the foot of the track and climbed steadily, surely without a check or a question, turning at each faint fork without being asked, as a horse turns onto the last mile home. Damson had been here before. Damson knew the way to the last cross, though Ellery Banfield had never seen it, and no living soul had been shown it. And Isabel sat with the reins loose in her hands, and let the mare carry her up, and did not need the map at all. The morning was the loveliest she had ever seen, or perhaps only the loveliest she had ever truly looked at. The rain had washed the whole world and gone, and left behind a light so clean and so gentle that every blade and stone of the fell stood clear and soft at once. The becks were full and loud and bright. The limestone shone wet and silver. The heather was coming into its purple on the high ground, mile on mile of it, running up to a sky of the palest, tenderest blue, with a few white clouds standing still and far. And everywhere, in the wet grass, in the low sun, there was that gold light on the wet stones that the very first painting had taught her to see. And now she saw it without being taught, saw it everywhere, could not stop seeing it, and understood that this was what her sister had carried inside her all along, this seeing, this daily uncovered wonder, and that it had been given to Isabel now, quietly, over 2 weeks and a green road, as a thing is handed from one pair of hands to another. They came up over the last rise a little before noon, and there, at the head of the whole country, was the last pitch. It was not grand. That was the first thing, and the thing that moved her most. After the force, after the great falls and the wide sweeps, she had half expected some final wonder, some view to end all views. And it was not that at all. It was a small green level place, cupped in the very top of the fells, with a spring rising clear and quiet from under a mossy stone, and a single old thorn tree, wind-bent and patient, and a low green mound of turf-covered stones that might once have been a shepherd's hut or a fold long ago, and might be nothing at all. And around it and below it, falling away on every side, softened and made gentle by the height, lay the whole of the country she had travelled, all of it, the whole loop of the map, every dale and every cross, spread out below in the clean noon light, like a green and grey and gold cloth laid out to dry. She could see it all from here. That was why her sister had loved this place, and kept it, and marked it, and told no one. It was the place you could see the whole of it from. The ford was down there, somewhere in the folds, the green hollow with the foxglove, the high shelf of the force with its thread of white, the farm where Grace Halliwell had loaded her with eggs, the gate where the boy had knotted the rope. All of it, the whole journey, the whole summer, the whole of her sister's 30 summers, held in one gentle glance from the top of the world. Isabel drew Damson to a halt by the thorn tree, and sat a moment, and then climbed down. The place was utterly still and utterly at peace, and it did not feel empty. That was the strange and lovely thing. It felt, if anything, full, occupied, tended, the way the little kept room at the end of a harbour wall had once felt to another woman on another journey she would never hear of. There was no one there. And yet Isabel did not feel alone. She felt, standing by the thorn tree at the head of the country, with the whole world laid out below her, that she had arrived somewhere she was expected, and that whoever had expected her was glad. She tended to damson first, from long habit and from love, unharnessed her and let her loose to crop the sweet high turf, and the mare went a little way off and set to grazing, content, home. And then Isabel went to the caravan and opened the door to make her tea and to sit and to look on this last pitch at the whole of where she had been. And the door, inside, was bare. She stood quite still on the step, looking at it. For 2 weeks, every morning, there had been a painting pinned to the inside of that door, cool and damp, waiting for her when she woke. She had not expected one now, not at midday, not on a pitch she had only this moment reached, and yet the bareness of the door stopped her and held her and told her something gently, that she stood on the step a long moment taking in. It was over. The paintings were done. There would be no more. She understood it standing there, without a word being said, the way she had understood everything on this road, not with grief, but with a kind of quiet completion, the feeling of the last page of a book turned softly down. Her sister had brought her all the way round the loop, cross by cross, morning by morning, teaching her to look, and here, at the last pitch, at the top of the world, the teaching was finished because the pupil no longer needed it. There was nothing left to show her. She could see now for herself. She went in. The little room was as she had left it, snug and dim and full of her sister, the paintings pinned in their rows above the stove. But on the fold-down table, in the soft light from the lace-curtained window, something had been made ready. The colour box was there, open, not under the seat where it lived, where she had kept it these 2 weeks, closed, carried, never used. It was on the table, open, its 2 rows of little coloured pans catching the light, rose madder and gamboge, and Prussian blue and burnt sienna, and the beloved panes grey, each worn into its hollow by 30 years of a hand that was gone. A jar of clean water stood beside it, filled from the spring. A brush lay across a fresh, clean sheet of paper, cleaned and pointed and waiting, and propped at the back of the table where she would see it was the unfinished painting of the Force, the one she had carried up from the pitch below, the water breaking off halfway down into bare waiting paper. Isabel stood and looked at it all for a long, long time. She knew what it was. There was no mistaking what it was. It was not a mystery anymore. Or if it was the kind of mystery you do not solve, but simply, at last, accept and are grateful for and step into. It was an invitation. It was the last thing her sister had to give her, and it was the greatest. Not another painting to look at, but the box and the brush and the water and the empty sheet and the whole wide seen and understood and beloved country laid out below the window, and unspoken, but as clear as if it had been written in that slanting brown hand across the top of the page, The words, "Now you." "I have shown you how to look," the open box said. "Now look and set it down yourself. It is your turn. It was always going to be your turn." "Why else do you think you came?" she thought, in that last moment before she sat, of all the road had given her. Of Ellery Banfield by his fire, with his tin turning on its strings, telling her there was no hurry on the road. Of Grace Halliwell at her gate, and the child's drawing of a cow. Of the boy, Tom Agle, and his brown, sure hands on the rope in the dusk. Of the mare, warm under her hand in the rain. Of every quiet morning, and every painting on the door, each one a small, patient lesson, each one bringing her a step nearer to this table, this box, this brush, this waiting sheet. She had thought, setting out, that she was going only to see the places her sister saw. She saw now that she had been coming, all along, without knowing it, here. Isabel sat down at the table. Her hands were not quite steady. She, who had never made a mark on a sheet of paper in her life, who had told Ellery Banfield and told the boy and told herself over and over that she had not come to paint, that she could not paint, that she had no more notion of it than of flying. She sat down at her sister's open box, in her sister's little painted room, at the top of her sister's country, and she looked out of the little window at the world laid out below, the dales and the walls and the wet gold light on the stones. And she looked, the way she had learned to look, and she saw, close and low and tender, just outside the window, a single sprig of purple heather nodding against the glass, with one bee working in it, and beyond it, small and soft and far, the whole enormous country falling away to the blue distance. "Look at what is here," the foxglove painting had said, weeks and a lifetime ago. "You are looking too far off. Look at what is here." She took up the brush. She dipped it in the clean spring water. She touched it, hesitating, to the pan of purple, the colour her sister had used for the heather on 100 hills, and she carried it, trembling only a little, to the clean waiting sheet. And she made her first mark. It was clumsy. Of course it was clumsy. It was the mark of a woman of 49 who had never held a brush, and it wandered, and it was too heavy, and it was not in the least like the sure loose strokes pinned in their rows above the stove. But it was purple, and it was heather, and it was hers, the first thing Isabel Harkness had ever made in her whole long, careful, serving life. And as she lifted the brush and looked at the small, clumsy, loving mark she had put down on the paper, she began, quietly, to smile and then to laugh softly, alone at the table, with the tears standing in her eyes and not falling, because she understood, at last and completely, that this was what it had all been for. This was the end of the road, and the whole point of the road. Not to see the places her sister saw, to become, at last, at the very end, and too late, and not too late at all, someone who could see them for herself, and set them down, and add her own small mark to the long green loop of looking that her sister had walked for 30 years and handed on. She painted all that afternoon. She was not good at it. She would not, she knew, ever be good at it in the way her sister had been. That gift was gone down the road and would not come again. But she found, as the afternoon went on and the light moved slowly round, that being good at it was not the point, had never been the point, was the one thing about it that did not matter in the very least. The point was the looking. The point was that to paint a thing, even clumsily, even badly, you had first to look at it truly, patiently, with the whole of your attention, longer and harder and more lovingly than you had ever looked at anything, and that in the looking, the thing gave itself to you, and you gave yourself to it. And for as long as it lasted, there was nothing in the world but you and the heather and the light, and no room in you for anything but wonder. She understood now why her sister had been happy. She had wondered about it all her life, half enviously, half disapprovingly, how a woman with no money and no husband and no settled home and nothing the world counted as success could have been so plainly, deeply, unshakably happy. And here was the answer, in a jar of spring water and a worn box of colour at the top of the world. Her sister had been happy because she spent her days looking at what was in front of her, and loving it, and setting it down. That was all. That was everything. It was the whole secret, and it had been there all along, in the little painted room, waiting under the seat in a box with a faint blue stain, for whoever should finally pick it up. Isabel picked it up, and in picking it up, she found, at the very end of the road, the thing she had come without knowing she was coming to find. Not her sister, who was gone and would not come again, but her sister's way of being in the world, her sister's daily uncovered wonder, handed on, at last, into Isabel's own stained and steady and no longer empty hands. The light went gold, and then rose, and then began, softly, to fail. Isabel laid down her brush at last, and looked at what she had made. A whole sheet of small, clumsy, loving marks. Heather and stone and water and light. The head of the country as she had seen it on her first day of truly seeing. It was not good. It was the best thing she had ever done. She propped it against the window to dry, beside the unfinished painting of the force. And she looked at the two of them together, her sister's and her own, the finished master hand and the clumsy beginning, side by side in the last of the light. And it seemed to her that between them they made one whole thing, the passing on complete, the loop closed, the road come round at last to its quiet end. She rose and went out into the cool rose evening, to see to Damson, and to stand a while at the head of the country, and watch the day go down over the whole of where she had been. And the light came down the dales, fold by fold, the way it had come down every evening of her journey. And the first star pricked out over the blue distance, and somewhere far below, a curlew called its long, soft falling call across the dusk. And Isabel Harkness stood at the top of the world, by the thorn tree, with her sister's colour on her hands, and her own first painting drying in the window behind her, and was at peace, wholly and simply at peace, in a way she had not known was given to people to be. There was nowhere she had to go. There was nothing she had to do. Tomorrow she would go down by some green lane or other, back into the world, and what she would do there she did not yet know, and did not need to know. There was no next cross now. There was no next thing. There was only this, the evening, and the country, and the quiet, and the long, slow gift of a summer that had taught her, at 49, how to see. The road had brought her all the way round, and set her down here at the top of everything, and given her back in her own 2 hands the whole world made new. She would sleep well tonight. She knew that. She would bank the little stove and light the lamp and draw the lace curtain and lie down in the narrow bed with her first painting drying above her and her sister's paintings all around her, and the mare cropping the sweet high turf outside under the coming stars. And she would sleep deeply and sweetly, the way she had slept every night on this road, the sleep of a body well used and a heart at rest. And in the morning, whatever the morning brought, she would wake and look and see. And now the day is fully down over the head of the country, and the first stars are out, and the little painted caravan sits warm and golden at the top of the world, with one small, clumsy, loving painting drying in its window. There is nothing left to do tonight. You need not go anywhere. You need not be anyone but who you are, lying here, warm and still, at the quiet end of a long green road. Think, if you like, of Isabel, of her hands with her sister's colour on them at last, of the heather nodding at the window, and the one bee working in it, and the whole wide country falling away below to the blue distance. Think of how far she came, and how slowly, and how she found, at the very end, not the sister she had lost, but the gift her sister had carried all along, handed gently into her own 2 hands. How to look, how to love what is in front of her, how to set it down and stay. There is no mystery here that needs solving tonight. Some things are not questions to be answered. They are only love, carried along a green road, morning by morning, from one pair of hands to the next, until the one who receives it can see for herself. So let the stars come out over the dales. Let the mare crop the sweet high turf in the dark. Let the little stove tick down, and the lamp burn low, and the spring rise quiet under its mossy stone. Let the whole soft country lie sleeping below, fold on fold, all the way to the sea. You have travelled far enough today. You may set your journey down now and rest. Sleep softly, dear one. However long the road, and however late you came to it, there is a place kept for you, warm and golden, at the top of the quiet world. You have only to close your eyes and look and let the morning bring what it will. Good night.